Someone visited his house for looking for him, and in fact he was in his house. "Is that Bayazid?" said the one. But Bayazid answered, "Go away, there is no one in this house but God." In another time he abruptly exclaimed, "There is nothing in this room except God." Those utterances, of course, have made many Islamic scholars, ulama, shocked, and several of them accuse him of being an infidel. Do we agree with the accusation? Let's scrutinize Bayazid Bastami's life and teachings. Abu Yazid Toifur bin Isa bin Surushan al-Bistami, or well known as Bayazid Bastami, was a Persian Sufi born at Bistam, in the province of Kumis in the northeastern Iran. He was born in 777. When still a little boy, he was called Toifur. Reportedly, when 10 years old, he began leaving his village to seek knowledge and make himself disciplined in the path of Sufism. Eventually, he spent the latter part of his life in his village when 40 years old. In his village, he taught his disciples in the way of Sufism. It is said that Bayazid never married in his life, but one of his bibliographers reported that he had a wife. Actually, being a celibate in Islam is not a must, because all Muslims revert to the tradition of the Prophet Muhammad that marriage is a half of a deen or religion. However, Al-Ghazali later elucidated that if one feels that by celibacy she or he is more able to serve her or his spiritual life in order to be closer to God, then she or he has a right to be a celibate. As a matter of fact, there were only few Sufis who didn't marry. The chief characteristics of Bayazid Bastami was to be ascetic. He did have nothing, because everything he had was given to the needy. He devoted his full life to worshipping God by following the Quran and the traditions or the prophetic practices. He decided to live in hunger and poverty. According to him, hunger is an indicator of his dependence on God, because when hungry one becomes aware of his or her weakness in front of God. Bayazid indicated the great value of the hunger by stating, "If Pharaoh had been hungry, he would not have declared, 'I am your supreme Lord.'" In respect to Zuhd, renunciation, Ahmad bin Hanbal classified it into 3 stages. First, keeping away from the unlawful is the renunciation of the ordinary. Second, keeping away from the virtues is the renunciation of the elite. And third, keeping away from anything making them forget God is the renunciation of the Gnostics. Bayazid had finished those 3 stages, therefore he was called the King of Gnostics, Sultanul Arifin. He said, "I was 3 days in renunciation. On the 4th day, I had finished it. The first day I renounced this word, the second day I renounced the other word. This means no fear of hell and no hope for heaven. And the 3rd day I renounced everything save God. When the 4th day came, nothing was left to me but God." His statement clearly indicates his discipline to keep renunciating the worldly things. However, in another time, paradoxically, Bayazid asserted, "This world is nothing. How can one renunciate it?" It is said that Bayazid was immensely concerned about performing all the Sharia law, and he was extremely humble and kind to all people he met. Unfortunately, those both the mass and the Islamic scholars, ulama, accused him of being a heretic and an infidel, only because of his shatohat, a sort of theophanic or ecstatic utterances. Bayazid is indeed well known for his ecstatic utterances, which are controversial for many Muslims. He is also regarded as the initiator of the doctrine of Ittihad, the mystical union. Actually, he never used the term, but the literal term he used was Tahrir Fana fit Tawhid, the union with God without any medium. We can assume that placing Bayazid Bastami as the initiator of the doctrine of Ittihad was based on his ecstatic utterances by subjective interpretations of his disciples. Ittihad etymologically means unity. In Sufism, the term is meant to indicate a stage where a Sufi has felt the union with God. Through the unity, a Sufi can see and feel the presence of God, and even she directly witnesses God by her spiritual eyes. In Ittihad, one can call the other Haimi, since the lover and the beloved have become united to each other. According to Bayazid Bastami, a Sufi cannot achieve Ittihad, the unity with God, of hand when she wants it. She has to undergo some processes as the first step to do to get Ittihad. Mujahadatun Nafs, or self-mortification, is the first step. Then the stage that must be passed towards a union is fana, annihilation or passing away. Sufis interpret fana in various ways. At the end of the spectrum, fana means a mystical state when one has felt that she loses all traces of her individual personality. Fana is paired with baqa, subsistent or abiding. The two states are complementary each other. The more one feels fana, the more one feels baqa. In other words, when a Sufi experiences fana, it means that simultaneously only God is baqa, and nothing else possesses real existence because God is the only reality. The full realization of this supreme truth is the loss of the self in the one. The two mystical states, in fact, can be found in one of the Quranic verses, that is, all that is on earth will perish, but will abide forever the face of thy Lord, full of majesty, bounty, and honor. In such a condition, many drunken Sufis, one of whom was Bayazid Bastami, abruptly exclaim ecstatic utterances. Ecstatic utterances stated by Sufis when they were in fana, annihilation, as stated by Bayazid, indicate that they were experiencing the union with God. If we refer to Bayazid's ecstatic utterances, we can classify them into three levels. The first level, the lowest, is the lowest ittihad that he had ever obtained. In this phase, he called God the third person, Huwa, he or God. Shatohats or ecstatic utterances in this level can be seen from his answer when he was asked Ma'rifah, the knowledge of God. He answered, whoever feels that she is united with God, Al-Haq, then she must always be in God. He used God as the third person. This indicates that there was a still separating distance between Bayazid and God. Ittihad, the mystical union with God, in this level cannot be considered to have been perfect since there was still dualism, he and God. The second level, he used the first person, I, and the second, you. Bayazid uttered, O Bayazid, indeed they are all my creatures except you. So I said, then I am you, you are me, and I am you. This Shatohat is more superior than the first. The first person, I, and the second, you, have evinced an intimacy in comparison with the first level where there was a wide distance between the first person and the third person. However, the second level, even if having evinced an intimacy to some extent, there was still duality between you and I. So that this level has not been perfect yet. The third level, he only used the first person in his ecstatic utterances. I am I, there is no God but I, so worship me. In another occasion, he said, glory be to me, how great is my majesty. Such ecstatic utterances are only proper to be exclaimed by God, because only God can praise himself and be praised with such utterances. Actually, we cannot accuse Bayazid Bastami of being an infidel due to his ecstatic utterances, since all of his ecstatic utterances reveal an entire erasure of his human subjectivity and its replacement with God, conceived as the absolute I, the true existence in reality. We cannot forget that when Bayazid said the ecstatic utterances, he was totally unaware of the existence of himself. He and his whole consciousness of himself were lost because of being grasped by the real existence, the God. Chitik says that the sayings are only possible to happen when the Sufi's ego has completely been obliterated from his consciousness. Of course, as I stated before, such ecstatic utterances can be misunderstood by the common Muslims and several of the Islamic scholars, especially jurists and theologians, who do not experience with such mystical feelings. Ibn Sulaim, considered Bayazid saying, "Glory be to me," similar to Pharaoh's statement, "I am the highest God, Ana Rabbukumul A'la," which means that Bayazid was assumed to be an infidel. Actually, many Sufis have tried to defend such ecstatic utterances stated by the drunken Sufis, one of whom tried to defend Bayazid Bastami was As-Sarraj. In his treatise Al-Lumma, As-Sarraj elucidated that the word me does not return to Bayazid but to God, since the existence of Bayazid and his I-ness had passed away, fana. In truth, the word me returning to God can be found in many verses of the Quran. When one reads, for instance, a verse in the Quran, "Indeed, I am Allah, there is no deity except me, so worship me and establish prayer for my remembrance," the word me surely returns to God. Contrary to Pharaoh's claim that showed his arrogance and lower ego, Bayazid saying return to God because he had lost awareness of himself and experienced self-forgetfulness. He didn't possess even himself, since God took over the control of his mouth. Bayazid was intoxicated in a mystical state, with the result that he didn't have awareness at all when uttering such ecstatic utterances. As we commonly know, the law cannot be imposed on a person in such conditions. Two quotes from Bayazid Bastami for closing this video. For 30 years I sought God, but when I looked carefully, I found that in reality God was the seeker and I the sought. Elsewhere he told, "I saw my Lord in my dreams, and I asked, 'How am I to find you?' He replied, 'Leave yourself and come. See you next time.'"